Good morning. Hello, and welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. I, of course, am Eric Miskell with EMS Now, and today I get to speak once again with David Schild, the Executive Director for the Printed Circuit Board Association of America, affectionately referred to as PCBAA. David, yeah, I was looking a month ago since we last spoke, and so much has happened already. You live in an exciting world with what you do.
Yeah, it is a really interesting time for microelectronics, and I would say more broadly for trade policy, for economic policy, for the intersection of industrial policy and national security. And we as an industry have had a really big win just in the last week in Washington.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, or at least one of the issues I want to talk to you
Sure.
about. Now, well, let me just let you go from there. I don't want to assume to know what you're referring to
Yeah,
exactly. So
so over
just
the
take it.
last weekend, the Congress passed an omnibus bill that included a number of appropriations for fiscal year 24. Now, let's start out by agreeing that should have happened in October last year, right? Regular order is that president's budget drops in the early spring, and then we work through the process with the committees, and hopefully by October, the government is funded for the next fiscal year. We were a little late, as we've been late in recent years. So over the weekend, among the appropriations bills that moved forward was the fiscal year 24 defense appropriations bill. And what's really important about that particular piece of legislation is the money within it for the Defense Production Act. Now, your listeners will probably remember that in March of 2022, the president got up and said, we're going to designate printed circuit boards and integrated circuit substrates as a critical national security technology. That's essentially the hunting license. The bullets in the gun, the ability to go out and actually support the industry, are in the DPA account at the Pentagon. And so what we were chasing in support with our partners at IPC was to make sure that that account funding was protected. And you have these disagreements, right, between the House and the Senate as the legislation works forward. And, we had basically one chamber of Congress saying, we're going to give that account about $618 million. We had another chamber saying, no, we're going to land at about $393 million, quite a delta there. And so we, with IPC, pushed a very focused lobbying effort, a lot of CEOs, a lot of push for support for this account at the Pentagon within Congress. And we ended up at $587 million enacted. So we were much closer to that higher number. And that account has to be funded because it's not just microelectronics that are supported. It's a lot of leading and bleeding edge technologies that the Pentagon needs. We saw how this rubber meets the road, right? Last year, we saw awards for Green Source and Calumet, specifically to work on organic substrates related to PCBs. And that's important work. Those awards really mean something to those companies. We as an industry think that the DPA is one tool for the government to put its money where its mouth is and say, in our national defense industrial strategy, we call out microelectronics, we call out single points of failure, we call out the need for modern weapons systems to rely on high technology. Where do we rely on to deliver that high technology? It's increasingly foreign sourcing. That's not going to work for us long term, right? Phrases like industrial capacity, a stronger industrial base, secure and resilient supply chains. That's what's in your national defense industrial strategy. So, let's hold the Pentagon's feet to the fire, for lack of a better phrase, and make sure that they fund and support our industry. So really happy with the amount of money that came down there. And what I think you're going to see is unspent FY23 and FY24 funds now, being used. And that's just sort of the first part of what's going on. The second part that I'm, sort of particularly thrilled at is that there was also directed language within the bill. So we didn't just give the money over. What we actually did is we said, you have got to spend this on microelectronics, that this is actually an important technology. Now, that's kind of remarkable because you don't see that language, in other bills, right? You don't see somebody telling the Secretary of Defense, here's the money, but here is where you actually have to specifically send it. And I'm trying to find the language here so that I can actually read you what they wrote, because it's pretty telling.
I have the
right?
letter in front of me, actually. I read, and I'm looking for it. I love the reference to an egregious loss of manufacturing capability, right?
Yeah, so you're reading right from our letter that was signed by more than 50 CEOs inside of
Yes.
IPC and PCBAA. And the result of that is the following language. And if it's all right, I'm just going to quote it because I think it's
Please, no, do
pretty
it.
strong and pretty direct, right? So in addition to this money, the appropriations bill says the following. It's noted that printed circuit boards are key components of advanced defense technologies, and that a strong domestic defense industrial base includes the ability to fabricate printed circuit boards. It's understood that the Department of Defense intends to use the DPA to address domestic industrial base shortfalls for printed circuit boards in fiscal year 2024. The Secretary of Defense is encouraged to prioritize Defense Production Act investments in support of domestic printed circuit board fabrication. So Congress is going beyond handing them the cash and saying, hey, it comes with some rules, it comes with some direction, it comes with some caveats. This is where we want you to spend it, right? And I'm really proud of our effort to educate, advocate, and legislate, because it's what led to this higher amount of funding and also this language. We have told enough members of the House and Senate now about the ubiquitous and critical nature of printed circuit boards. And guess what? It shows up in legislation. So we're really happy with what happened over the weekend.
No, I'm glad to hear that. Hey, listen, you made a statement there talking about now that this is the 587 million, now it's being used. How and how soon will that start to be seen in the industry?
Right. So obviously that's fiscal year 24, and there's some unspent money left from fiscal year 23 in the DPA account. Again, the most recent awards, there are 3 companies that received funds to advance PCB work. There was some work on hypersonic glide vehicles, a small company out of New England, just probably a month ago. And then Green Source and Calumet, much larger awards in the end of last year. The DPA process highlights certain technology areas where the Pentagon needs solutions. And it's almost a solicitation process by which you as a company can come in with a white paper and say, I think I can help you solve your problem. Can you help underwrite my research and development, my prototyping, bringing these things to market? And that's how you end up with a DPA award, right? It's not simply the Pentagon acting as Santa Claus and unexpectedly showing up at your door. You have to explain and partner with them on how that problem is going to be solved. We're proud that industry is stepping up because, of course, these are important technical challenges, right? These are the critical national security needs that the Pentagon faces. And it looks at microelectronics and says, we don't have what we need. Industry, please go invent it, right? Please go create it. So, it fosters a lot of innovation. And that's, again, that's the purpose of DPA. First, you say that there's a technology security and critical to national security, excuse me, and then you fund it. So when you ask, where is this money going to go? I hope it's going to go. It should go. The Congress is telling the Secretary it must go to domestic printed circuit board and IC substrate capacity.
So somebody watching this, if they're in the market and they're looking to potentially expand or build a facility fab here in North America, they could approach and be a beneficiary, hopefully, of some of these funds.
Yeah, the DPA office is very customer friendly, I would say. Their website has extensive information about how you could apply for these funds and move forward. And of course, if anybody is interested in pursuing this, our association is happy to connect them with that office where we've got a good relationship.
A couple other issues I wanted to touch on with you. We're talking about defense here mostly, right? But it's clearly, defense is what? I think 4% of the PCB industry, right? So what needs to happen to expand the scope of your activities to include maybe non-defense electronics?
Well, we have, I think it's almost 55 members as of today inside of PCBAA. We started with 5. And, we represent folks in the raw and refined materials category, tooling and processes. We've got board fabricators. We've got assemblers. Hopefully soon we'll have OEMs. We're trying to capture the whole value chain because a healthy and robust domestic industry hits everybody, right? The rising tide lifts all boats argument. Certainly you would say if an Isola, right, or an AGC or an AGY is delivering laminate or prepreg, they need a TTM or an Amphenol or a Sanmina to have successful U.S. operations. So people look around the industry at their partners, their suppliers, their customers, and say, is there anybody driving an effort to promote the domestic industry? And they see that, we're the answer to that question. You make a great point about defense versus commercial. And sometimes I analogize jet engine production in this regard. Certainly when companies like, let's say, Pratt and Whitney need to produce military engines. They are running a line very, very similar to their commercial engine line.
Mhm.
The Defense Department has long recognized that the health of your commercial base does tie back to the health of your defense base, right? Commercial production sometimes helps to fund, helps to underwrite, helps to do co-innovation, co-research and development for products that might be single use or even dual use. We see a lot of dual use microelectronics now, things that fall into civilian applications as well as defense applications. I don't think we can have a healthy and long-term defense market if we don't also have a healthy and sustainable commercial market. And what I would say about our legislative proposals are, yeah, there's dollars from the Pentagon out there, but the PCBs Act, the Protecting Circuit Boards and Substrates Act, doesn't distinguish between commercial and defense applications. It says if you make boards and substrates in America, your customers will get to take a 25% tax credit. If you make boards or substrates in America, we will put out billions of dollars in grant money, very similar to what the CHIPS Act has done, to allow you to expand capacity, hire workers, do training, all of the cost and capital intensive activities you need to expand. I don't see these causes as being mutually exclusive. The Pentagon obviously has to narrow its focus. It's not going to fund commercial development, but it sees how the health of the commercial sector and the health of the defense sector are tied together.
Mhm. So I wanted to also kind of ask about the cost competitive side of this, right? I've talked to people in the industry and they say, this is great here, but if the board is $100 in the US and so I can still get it $20 over in Asia, I'm going to Asia because it's a cost issue.
Sure.
And I know you've had to address the issue of cost, and it is business at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
How do you consider those issues?
This is a question we get, Eric, on Capitol Hill all the time. What's going to happen if we actually achieve these legislative objectives to the industry? So let's start with where we are, right? We used to have 2,200 board shops in America. We used to have 30% of global market share. We're down to less than 150 shops. We're down to 4% of global market share. Recent events demonstrate very clearly why making more things in America is tied to our economic security and our national security. So I would start with an argument about secure and resilient supply chains and say that while we think there's always going to be sourcing globally, we need to have a sustainable market in the United States. And in times of crisis, in times of man-made or natural disaster, we need to be able to look onshore for production capability. And right now, that's pretty limited. That's pretty thin. That's contracting. It's going in the wrong direction. I don't think certain products or certain sectors of microelectronics are ever coming all the way back to America. We are always going to have global supply chains. Our members have a global footprint. If you say in 5 years, boards for dishwashers and thermostats are still going to be made overseas, I think a lot of people would acknowledge that's the reality. Now, let me ask you about critical infrastructure, right? Boards for banking that keep Wall Street running, boards for medical devices, hospital servers, building out an EV charging network across America. Where should those microelectronics come from? Is it healthy? Is it good risk mitigation to depend on foreign sourcing for those microelectronics? I think the answer is quite obviously no. So there are going to be places where a tax credit would bring us into a cost competitive position. It won't happen across every single vertical. And so the future we're looking at has a healthy and robust U.S. industry with innovation, with leading edge technology, and of course, global sourcing for many of the products that we live with and depend on every day. So I just think it's a more rebalanced global portfolio, right? It's somewhere north of 4%. I don't know where that exact number falls, but folks who say, well, you're never going to bring it all back, that's not our intent. Our intent is not to bring it all back. It's to create a healthy place in the market so that we can say, we make this stuff in America.
Yeah. And, and I'm also, excuse me, struck by the fact that, EMS companies who I deal with a lot are becoming more competitive out in North America based on automation, right? Mm-hmm. These aren't, hordes of people, board stuffing anymore. They're leveraging robotics or leveraging automation to do it. The example of the Schweitzer who built their own fab here up in Washington State, right? Probably one of the cleanest on the planet these days from an environmental piece, but also heavily automated and can be very cost competitive as a result. So I'm assuming you see it the same way.
Yeah, I think when you look at the newer facilities that are being built, Schweitzer's a great example. I would point to the Isola facility in Chandler that's doing laminate and pre-preg and the amount of automation they've adopted. We certainly see some of the old, dirtier, some might say industrial processes out there in PCB production, but innovation is a part of the industry story as well. So we need more factories being built. And when they're built, I think you'll see that they don't resemble the factories of old. And then of course, we'll have workforce challenges, right? I don't want to cast that issue aside either, right? We're going to have to populate these factories. We're going to have signal integrity engineers, computer scientists, electrical engineers, chemists, right? Any number of professionals to help us get this work done. And as you're seeing with CHIPS Act implementation, building the factory is just step one. Filling it with workers to deliver product is a more, perhaps sometimes more important, more challenging step two. So, we're facing, similar headwinds as anybody else who's attempting to do American manufacturing right now. But we also have another wind at our back, which is policymakers going, we have got to avoid foreign dependency. We've got to avoid single points of failure. We have to get ahead of the next shortage or the next instance of us sort of not controlling our own product lines. So I'm encouraged by the number of people on Capitol Hill that are acting. And honestly, I think this win on the Hill last weekend is something we wouldn't have seen 3 years, 5 years ago, right? Because we really didn't have a coalition pushing for fund us and let's get some directed language that calls out our importance, right? I think we're kind of walking tall lately, and it's a great place to be.
Yeah, and to that point, just out of curiosity, how is the mood? You're in Washington a lot. You're walking the floors, meeting with the people. We read it. Those of us who don't come to Washington, you see all the crazy
Sure.
stories in the press of all the disharmony, whatever you wish to call it, right? But it sounds like things are still happening. So there's still kind of coalescence around important issues to make sure those are moved forward.
Yeah, I try not to let myself get distracted by the noise of Washington. I think that there's always going to be people who are more interested in headlines than they are producing legislative results. We try to work with folks who are more focused on what's good for their constituents and what's good for the American economy and our national security. I'm not thrilled that the appropriations bills moved in March of 24 when they should have moved in October of 23, but I will take the win in this case. It's an election year. Congress is going to be increasingly distracted as we get closer and closer to November. That's why we've got to make the most of the push, I think, in the next few months for the FY25 appropriations. We're already getting into the money for fiscal year 25. And of course, we have our annual meeting, June 10th through the 12th in Washington, D.C. PCBA will take our members up to Capitol Hill and we'll lobby on things like, we need a Senate companion for HR 3249. We need more co-sponsors for that bill. I'm sure we'll be up there arguing for continued funding in appropriations. So there'll be a lot of touch points with lawmakers. But I will tell you this, and this is the reason we do these fly-ins. Nobody tells the story better than someone who runs a factory in Nashua, New Hampshire, or Chaska, Minnesota, or Calumet, Michigan. Those are the best storytellers. They resonate the most with elected officials. That's why we bring our people to DC.
And the other last topic to kind of touch on, and you've said it repeatedly, the resiliency of supply chains is the critical kind of consideration. And we're reminded of that this week with what happens in Baltimore.
Sure.
And over the last many months and what's happening, off of Yemen and shipping through, the Red Sea and all that, right? This remains a volatile kind of planet to be doing business on globally.
I
And we
think
have to be
yeah,
prepared.
I think the pragmatic view is that supply chain disruptions are a matter of when, not if. When I talk to heads of supply chain, when I talk to heads of purchasing, for example, at big companies, OEMs, they want to diversify. They want to nearshore, they want to friendshore, they want to onshore. The reason they want to do it is because they can't, in a world of just-in-time delivery, if things don't show up at all, you're way past just in time. Now you're late. Now store shelves are empty, car lots are empty. God forbid, we can't deliver what we need to our warfighters. So I think what you're seeing is a desire to rebalance the portfolio all the way up to the OEM, because people go, oh, this is like saying, is there going to be a hurricane, or what have I done to prepare for the hurricane, right? I think what have I done to prepare is the smarter take. And you're starting to see manufacturers take that attitude. So they look around the United States and say, yeah, we could do this here. We used to do this here at a much greater scale. The question isn't, can we? It's, do we have the political will to make the investments, quite frankly, that foreign competitors have made to get to these shares of market? So I'm optimistic, but you're right. You don't have to, do anything but open your laptop and realize that supply chains are fragile. And there's stuff that we can do to mitigate that.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Before we leave, I always want to kind of give you a chance to tell people how they can get involved with the PCBAA. Sure. So please do that.
Yeah, we're really proud of our growth. Again, I think it's 55 or maybe it's 56 members as of this morning, which is up from, 5 less than 3 years ago. We turned 3 years old in April, and I'm excited for that anniversary. PCBAA.org, and always online at Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find our social channels. I spend a lot of time, honestly, Eric, talking to OEMs, assemblers, EMS, surface mount, PCB fabs, raw material suppliers. Companies across the microelectronics ecosystem call us up and say, just tell us what you're doing. Tell us what the focus is. Tell us how it's going to sort of lift us up. And I like those conversations. It teaches me a lot more about the diversity and the strength of our industry. So, find us online, find me personally. We want to have a conversation about what we can do for you. And I think people are starting to look around and see their suppliers and their customers on the team and saying, yeah, I should be there too.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because I think, and I was guilty of this too initially when I first heard about you. I thought, oh, that applies to the board makers and the substrate guys, but it is so much more, right? It's anybody who's working within that microelectronics kind of ecosystem. Sure.
We signed up our first pure play substrate company this week. And, there's a desire in the United States to get into the substrate business. The Japanese, as you know, pretty much control that market. And so, we've got a company that is planning to build in Arizona, and they just joined PCBAA in the last couple of days. So every week I'm discovering new folks who want to be a part of our cause. And I think the sky's in the limit in terms of how big we can be, and size drives results. This is something that's a little unique about associations in the advocacy space. Is the more people I have, that's another member of Congress, that's another member of the Senate, that's another administration official whose ears perk up a little bit when they hear our incoming, right? Because they say, wait a minute, PCBAA, oh, you guys are in my state. This represents so many millions in economic activity, so many thousands of high-tech jobs. Our size relates to our political power. So the bigger we get, the better the results will be.
Excellent. So everybody listening, if you're in the microelectronics workspace, get involved. I think, David, you do a great job for your mission there. I'm a big fan of your work, and 3 years old now. So next time we speak, we'll be celebrating an anniversary.
It's not a lot of candles to have to buy, but I'm really proud of what we've done in those 36 months.
I'll buy the candles, please. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, listen, good luck. Wish you nothing but success as you continue with chasing the mission here. And as you always say, you didn't this time, but chips don't float. So
chips don't float. We will be back with more good news about that cause, hopefully soon.
Very good. David, appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.